Hey there, deep divers. Ready for something different?
I think this is going to be a good one.
It really is. Today we're diving headfirst into the world of Spiritism in Brazil. Our listener sent us this fascinating Wikipedia article on its history.
And let me tell you,
I know, right?
it's a wild ride.
Definitely wild and definitely different.
What I find most fascinating is how Spiritism in Brazil isn't just some recent trend.
Right. It runs deep.
Deeply rooted in the country's history, going way back.
Even further back than the Fox sisters. I had no idea that Brazilians were already exploring things like vital fluids in the early 1800s.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking Marquis of Maricá publishing on spiritualist teachings way before it hit the global stage.
It really makes you question what we think we know about history, doesn't it?
It really does. It reminds me of that saying, what is history but a fable agreed upon?
Exactly. While Allan Kardec was busy codifying Spiritism over in France, Brazil was already laying its own groundwork for this movement.
Okay, so let's talk about this whole turning tables craze that swept over Brazil in the 1850s.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it sounds like something straight out of an old-timey mystery novel, but it was all the rage in Europe, too.
You're right. This wasn't just a Brazilian thing, and the newspaper O Cearense even reported on it back in 1853. It's actually the first documented instance we have of this phenomenon in Brazil.
So basically, Brazil got a crash course in Spiritism, French edition.
Well, not just any edition. We're talking about the works of Kardec, translated and disseminated by dedicated individuals like Adolphe Hubert and Casimir Luto.
Those were some passionate early adopters. I can picture those early Spiritist circles, everyone huddled together, debating Kardec's latest theories.
I can practically hear the conversations.
With their French accents and everything.
But it's important to remember that just like in France, not everyone was immediately sold on these ideas. We see a lot of skepticism, even ridicule, in the press from those early days.
Ah, skepticism. A tale as old as time.
It really is. And interestingly enough, these reactions are very similar to those documented in Kardec's review Spirit over in France. It's like history rhyming.
It always seems to find a way, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the spooky setup. Now let's talk organization. Actual Spiritist groups start popping up.
Right. Things started to become more structured in 1865 when the first official Spiritist group emerged in Bahia.
Bahia, the birthplace of Brazilian Spiritism. Who knew?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Almost like a spiritual epicenter.
And then, boom, just a few years later, in 1873, the Brazilian Spiritist Association enters the scene. That's a pretty big deal.
A pivotal moment indeed. And like any good organization, it needed a strong leader. That's where Luis Olimpio Teles de Minas comes in.
He sounds important.
Incredibly so. He was instrumental in formalizing and spreading Spiritism in Bahia. We're talking translating Kardec, publishing Spiritist works, the whole 9 yards. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about this new kid on the block. The Catholic Church, in particular, voiced its opposition early on.
You've got to expect a little pushback with any new movement, especially when it comes to matters of faith.
It's inevitable. But even with these challenges, Spiritism found fertile ground in Brazil, and it was only a matter of time before it took root and flourished.
And flourish it did. But hold on, what about Rio de Janeiro? I mean, it was the capital back then. Surely they had something to say about all of this.
Oh, Rio was never one to be left out of the action. And while you had those turning tables and skeptical journalists there, too.
A classic Rio, right.
Rio's story adds an interesting layer of social activism to the mix.
Oh, how so?
Well, take the Sociedad de Estudos Espíritas Grupo Confucio, for example, founded in 1873.
What did they do?
They were translating Kardec, yes, but they were also providing free homeopathic care to the needy. They saw a direct link between spiritual well-being and social responsibility.
Wow, that's really putting their beliefs into action.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just about talking to spirits, it was about making a real difference in the world around them.
Precisely. And this connection between spiritual practice and social action is a recurring theme we see throughout the history of Brazilian Spiritism. It's a fascinating aspect of the movement.
It really is. But those early Spiritists in Rio, they faced some challenges too, right? Wasn't there something about pushback from the authorities?
Oh, absolutely. Remember those newspaper clippings you mentioned? Well, those weren't just expressing skepticism. They were practically begging the police to step in and put a stop to what they perceived as dangerous and subversive.
Wow. And well, did they? Did the police actually intervene?
In 1881, they issued an order that banned Spiritist activities in Rio.
Seriously? Wow.
They even threatened jail time for anyone who dared to disobey.
Talk about a crackdown. It's kind of mind-blowing to think that something as seemingly harmless as, talking about spirits could cause such a stir.
Well, that's the power of belief systems, isn't it?
True enough. But this clash also highlights a crucial aspect of Spiritism's journey in Brazil. It wasn't just about navigating external opposition. There were internal divisions brewing as well. Remember that whole scientific versus mystical spiritist debate?
Oh, how could we forget? That's a big one.
Like Spiritism's own internal tug-of-war.
It was a defining moment for the movement. It went beyond just a war of words.
Right. This wasn't just a philosophical debate happening in some ivory tower somewhere.
Exactly. It played out in how Spiritism was practiced, how people viewed it.
Okay, so who were the major players in this tug-of-war?
Well, you had figures like Professor Angeli Tortoroli championing a more rational, evidence-based approach.
That's very scientific method.
Exactly. It was all about bringing scientific rigor to the study of Spiritism. On the flip side, you had Dr. Bezerra de Mesas,
And he represented.
the more religious, moral side of things. For him, Spiritism was deeply intertwined with faith and spiritual experience.
So two very different lenses through which to view the same phenomena.
And this wasn't just an academic debate either. It really shaped the future of Spiritism in Brazil. Kind of mirrored the bigger battle between science and religion going on at the time, actually.
It's incredible when you think about it. Social change, scientific progress, the search for spiritual meaning, they all intertwine in the story of Brazilian Spiritism.
It's a testament to the human experience, isn't it? That constant push and pull between what we know and what we yearn to understand.
Absolutely. And it's really remarkable. Despite all of this, the opposition, the internal struggles, even the skepticism, Brazilian Spiritism just kept growing.
It's true. You'd almost think those challenges fueled the movement even more.
It makes you think about those historical accounts of police raids, attempts to suppress their publications, really puts things into perspective.
And it wasn't just external pressure. Those early spiritists had to overcome a lot of internal resistance, too.
It's like they were fighting on two fronts. It makes those figures like Augusto Elias da Silva all the more inspiring.
Oh, absolutely. To stand up and advocate for something you believe in, even in the face of such adversity, that's true courage.
And speaking of inspiring figures, the 20th century brought some truly remarkable individuals to the forefront of Brazilian Spiritism.
This is where the story gets really interesting. Are you thinking of Zé Arrigo?
I am. And Chico Xavier. You can't talk about Brazilian Spiritism without mentioning those two.
Arrigo. He claimed to channel the spirit of a German physician, Dr. Fritz.
I remember reading about this. And get this, he'd perform surgeries using a rusty knife.
A rusty knife? You can't make this stuff up.
I know, right? You have to wonder what people thought back then, witnessing something like that.
We're talking about thousands flocking to him, hoping for a miracle.
Well, I bet he drew a crowd. But I can only imagine the controversy.
You're telling me. Arrigo faced lawsuits, accusations of witchcraft. He was even accused of practicing medicine illegally.
Makes sense. I'm sure the medical establishment wasn't too happy about his methods.
They weren't, but it goes beyond that. Arrigo's story really sparked a national conversation about healing, the limits of medical authority, what it means to be a legitimate healer.
It's like his case held a mirror up to Brazilian society, forcing people to confront their deeply held beliefs about science, spirituality, the nature of reality itself.
You've hit the nail on the head. In this dynamic, where personal stories intertwine with larger social transformations, it's a recurring theme throughout Brazilian Spiritism.
So we have Arrigo and his dramatic healings. And then there's Chico Xavier, revered for a completely different reason, psychography.
Exactly. While Arrigo focused on the physical body, Xavier was all about healing the soul. He claimed to communicate with spirits and transcribe their messages.
And he wasn't messing around either. We're talking over 400 books attributed to different spirits.
400! That's astonishing. And they weren't just random ramblings either.
Right. What were they about?
Everything. Philosophy, messages of comfort from loved ones who had passed, even guidance on navigating life's challenges.
And those books, they resonated with people, didn't they? They offered solace, a connection to something beyond the material world.
You're absolutely right. They provided a lifeline for many, and they helped to cement Xavier's place as one of the most important figures in Brazilian Spiritism.
But even with that kind of following, I imagine Xavier had his fair share of doubters.
You can't please everyone. Like Arrigo, he faced accusations of fraud, but none of those claims ever really stuck. And regardless of what anyone believed, his influence on Brazilian Spiritism is undeniable.
It's like clockwork with fame often comes skepticism, especially in a field like this.
It's par for the course. So we have these fascinating individuals capturing the public imagination, but what about the movement as a whole? How was Spiritism evolving beyond these individual stories?
Good question. What was happening behind the scenes, so to speak?
Well, remember the Golden Pact from the 1940s? That was a pivotal moment. It's like Spiritism collectively decided it was time to get organized.
What do we name?
The FEB, the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, they took on a more prominent role trying to bring together all those different Spiritist groups under one umbrella, a move towards unity and structure.
So it's like Spiritism was transitioning from this more fragmented movement into something much larger, more organized.
Exactly. And this shift towards organization coincided with a growing interest in examining Spiritism through a scientific lens.
Interesting. So it wasn't just about faith anymore.
Researchers, even those who weren't necessarily Spiritists themselves, started studying mediums, investigating paranormal claims, trying to make sense of it all.
It's fascinating how the human mind works. There's this inherent desire to apply logic and reason, even to the most extraordinary phenomena.
Absolutely. This desire for understanding, coupled with the charisma of figures like Xavier, led to continued growth for Spiritism in the latter half of the 20th century. But of course, it also led to some fascinating debates within the movement itself.
Okay, so we've seen Spiritism grapple with issues of science and skepticism, but you mentioned internal debates. What were those about?
Well, even with the unifying efforts of the FEB, different branches of Spiritism began to emerge. Each had its own interpretation of Kardec's teachings, its own emphasis on certain aspects of the doctrine.
So it's like Spiritism in Brazil wasn't this monolithic entity, but rather this dynamic, evolving movement with different streams of thought.
Exactly. For example, you had groups like Restangwism, which questioned the traditional Christian understanding of Jesus and emphasized reincarnation as a central tenet.
So a different take on the spiritual hierarchy within Spiritism?
Precisely. Then there was Christian rationalism, which downplayed the role of mediums and emphasized the scientific and philosophical aspects of Spiritism, almost like a secular version of the doctrine.
Fascinating. So even within this movement that was already challenging societal norms, there was this drive to further question and explore different avenues of spiritual understanding.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another significant branch, Umbanda. Now, Umbanda is a fascinating case because it blends elements of Spiritism with Afro-Brazilian traditions, incorporating deities and rituals not found in traditional Kardecism.
So it's like Umbanda represents a fusion of different spiritual lineages, a testament to Brazil's diverse cultural landscape.
Exactly. And this diversity within Brazilian Spiritism speaks to its enduring appeal. It's not a one-size-fits-all spirituality. It offers a framework for understanding the world and our place in it, but it's also adaptable and open to different interpretations.
That makes a lot of sense. So given this dynamic history, where does that leave Spiritism in modern-day Brazil?
It leaves it as a vibrant and multifaceted spiritual movement that's woven into the very fabric of Brazilian society. Remember how we talked about those early Spiritists in Rio providing free healthcare? That spirit of social responsibility is still a cornerstone of Brazilian Spiritism today.
So it's not just about personal salvation or communicating with spirits, it's about making a real difference in the world.
Exactly. Spiritist groups across Brazil are renowned for their charitable work. They run schools, hospitals, orphanages, you name it. They're putting those Kardecian principles of charity and compassion into action.
That's pretty remarkable. But it's not all about soup kitchens and hospitals, right? I mean, Spiritism has gone mainstream in a big way. It's even spawned its own media empire.
You're right, this isn't just a fringe movement anymore. Spiritism boasts its own television channels, radio stations, publishing houses, even movies. Remember that list of films you shared? Chico Xavier, No Solar. These weren't obscure documentaries. They were box office hits.
It's like Spiritism has become a part of Brazilian pop culture. And speaking of pop culture, what about those Spiritist novels that were all the rage?
Yes. The rise of Spiritist fiction is another fascinating development. These novels, often incorporating reincarnation and karmic themes, resonated with a huge audience. They further propelled Spiritist ideas into the mainstream. For example, have you heard of the term karma before?
Oh, definitely. It's that idea that your actions in this life have consequences that can carry over into future lives.
Yeah, exactly. And Spiritist novels often weave these karmic narratives into their plots. They explore themes of love, loss, redemption, and the interconnectedness of all beings across time and lifetimes.
It's amazing how adaptable Spiritism has been. evolving with the times, embracing new mediums, and finding new ways to connect with people.
And that's why its future in Brazil is so intriguing. Despite facing criticism and skepticism, Spiritism continues to thrive. It attracts followers from all walks of life. And with its emphasis on personal growth, social responsibility, and the interconnectedness of all beings, it offers a message that seems particularly relevant in today's world.
It makes you wonder what the next chapter holds, doesn't it? Will those internal debates lead to new branches and interpretations? Will Spiritist media continue to captivate the public imagination? It's a story that's still being written.
And that's the beauty of a deep dive like this. It's not about reaching a definitive answer, but about opening up new questions, new avenues for exploration.
So, to our listener out there, we leave you with this. As Spiritism in Brazil continues to evolve, how might it shape the country's social and spiritual landscape in the years to come? Will its message of charity and compassion resonate even more strongly in a world grappling with increasing division and uncertainty? These are questions worth pondering. This has been an incredible journey into the heart of Brazilian Spiritism, a tradition rich in history, brimming with fascinating figures and full of thought-provoking ideas. We encourage you to keep exploring and see what other insights you can uncover. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.